Hello and welcome to the Vedic Conversation, where each episode we take a different topic and look at it through the lens of storytelling and from the perspective of the Veda, an ancient but very much still relevant body of knowledge from India. I'm Rory Kinsella, a Vedic meditation teacher based in Sydney, and I'm joined by my Vedic colleagues Anthony Thompson in London and Derrick Yanford in New York. This episode was recorded at the end of May, and we're talking about the subject of attachment. We look at how when we change our expectations, it can often change the outcome. But first, sit back and listen to our stories, and then we'll dive into the conversation. And as always, don't forget to stick around to the end, where we'll give an exercise in how you can apply this knowledge to your daily life. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
I've had a lifelong interest in art, which started when I was quite young. My grandfather was keen on helping me look at art, and he gave me some of the very first art books I owned. Over the 40 years or so when I worked in the art world, I collected many more books, covering all areas of my interest, including Indian and Islamic art, rugs and textiles, Venice and the Renaissance, and British 20th century pictures and sculpture. It turned out to be quite a large library. In the early days, before the internet, when I was travelling around Europe on business and had spare time, I would often drop into antiquarian booksellers and specialist bookshops, seeking out hard-to-find volumes. There was lots of correspondence, yes, letters, written back and forth between the booksellers and myself, them telling me they'd found something I'd been looking for, and me asking them about the condition and price, and if they could put it aside for me until I was next in town. Later, when I was working for myself, this library became an indispensable reference tool, and people would often come and ask to take a look. I've moved home a couple of times, and schlepping the books was always a logistical headache. Not only moving them, but also finding the appropriate space to accommodate them. A couple of years ago, I was looking at them and realized most of them hadn't been taken off the bookshelf for years, and the library was essentially redundant. Now, if you'd asked me even 5 years before, it would have been inconceivable that I would have considered disposing of any of these books. It was obvious what I had to do. I took the decision to sell them, which turned out to be really straightforward. Once I'd made my mind up, I just got on with it and put the plan into action. If I ever need to look at a book, I know I can go to several reference libraries, and there's a lot of material now online. My attachment to this group of books was emotional. It gave me a lot of pleasure and helped satisfy my inquiring mind. There was the thrill of the chase and putting together a comprehensive library. Now it was taking up both physical and emotional space and was irrelevant. I found over the years that emotional attachment gets in the way of making these sorts of decisions. The original purpose or reason is now redundant. It no longer serves any purpose. We live in abundance, some of which is no longer relevant or sustainable. Vedic meditation teaches us the power of non-attachment, of letting go of things which are no longer helpful. These could be styles of relating, old ways of thinking, obsolete behavior, habits and objects. How rigidly are you attached to the things that no longer serve the evolutionary process? Can you let go of possessions, of specific ideas, timings and outcomes? Or are you going to be dragged and weighed down? I found that when you question an attachment and then take the appropriate action, you feel physically and mentally lighter, and that helps you move forward effortlessly with grace and ease.
Back in 2013, I turned around decades of laziness and ran my first marathon. I did pretty well, finishing in 3.5 hours, and a couple of years later I got it into my head that I wanted to break the 3-hour mark, which is no mean feat. I've run lots of half marathons, and my thing is that you could easily finish a half marathon without too much training. But when it comes to a full marathon, which is 42 kilometers or 26 miles, there's no getting away from serious training. And if you want to do it in 3 hours, you need to do serious training. But about 20 kilometers in, which is just under the halfway mark, things started going wrong. a pain that I've had before flared up in my leg, and it began in my hip and went down towards my knee and the outside of my knee. And as a runner, I'd learned this old trick of not entertaining negative thoughts. And I find that in races, when I let go, let the negative thoughts in about injuries, then I tend to fall apart. So after a few minutes of this, I looked at my watch and saw that the last kilometre had been in 4.5 minutes, which would put me 15 seconds behind where I needed to be. And I tried jumping back up to the faster pace again, but it wasn't having it. My leg. The tightness and discomfort had kind of coalesced into this undeniable pain. But I pushed on like this for 2 more kilometers with the leg seizing up more and more. And my times were getting slower and slower, 4 minutes 35, 4 minutes 45. And at this point I saw a friend who'd come to support me, and it was kind of all I could do to acknowledge her and motion that I wasn't really doing very well. And around the next corner, when I was out of sight, I finally admitted to myself that I couldn't go on like that. And my dream of this 3-hour marathon was crumbling around me. And at this point, I was already a few minutes behind schedule, but more importantly, I could barely keep moving. And I'd built up this time to such an extent that the thought of running a slower marathon, even slower than my previous outing, kind of seemed pointless. And these were the thoughts going through my head as I pulled up and started hobbling down the side of the road. But my main problem at this point, which I only realized in retrospect, that I was running the wrong storyline. The story I was so attached to was running a 3-hour marathon. And judged against that storyline, I was failing. I was walking the course with no chance of getting near my target, and I was seriously considering giving up. Why go on if I couldn't get my goal? And not even beat my previous time. But then I remembered how many people had sponsored me for the run. I wasn't just running for personal glory like I usually did. I was raising money for charity. And this fact completely changed my perspective. I was no longer running or hobbling as it was then for myself, but for the people who believed in me and for the cause that I picked. And gone were all thoughts of quitting, and it became a question of just getting across the line. I had this new mountain to climb, which wasn't the one that I'd set out to climb, but it was a challenging summit nonetheless. Could I finish the second half of this marathon while carrying an injury? And I found that my legs started feeling well enough to jog slowly, and the 3 hours 15 people and the 3 hours 20 people came past, and I was jogging around 6 minutes a kilometre at this point, which was almost 2 minutes behind my original pace. And I went on like this, trundling on for about 10 kilometres. Still running in a very jagged, kind of lopsided way, but the pain wasn't as bad as before. And then the 3 hours and 30 minutes pacer came past me, and I realized that even with all the walking and slow jogging, I'd only just fallen behind the pace of my previous time. So at this point there was 10 kilometers to go, and I decided to take a stab at getting a half decent time. So I tried to up the pace and got to about 5.5 minutes a kilometer. And I wasn't overtaking anyone, but people weren't overtaking me anymore. And the 3 hour 35 pacer went past, but I kept on going. And the 3 hour 40 guy never caught me. And I finished in 3 hours 38, which was only 7 minutes behind my previous time. And I also raised over $1,000 for charity. And the turning point was where I changed the script. I let go of my rigid attachment to my previous goal. And when I was running to finish to overcome the injury and doing it for the greater goal of raising money, the race had meaning again, albeit a different meaning. And by letting go of my attachment to my expectations, I was able to rescue a victory of sorts from the jaws of defeat and enjoy the experience I was being offered, even though it wasn't the experience I wanted or expected.
I would like to talk about attachment. I remember this one time, I think I was 10 or 11, and my father had promised me a 10-speed bicycle for my birthday. I remember going to the store with him and showing him exactly the model and the color that I wanted. I was so excited, and I imagined how different my life would be with this new bike. But shortly before my birthday, my father had lost his job and no longer had the money to purchase the bike as he had promised. And I was devastated, disappointed, and heartbroken. And all those dreams and plans I had were now gone. I think I cried for like 3 days. Well, what really caused all of these adverse emotions and feelings was not so much the fact that I didn't get the bike, but more accurately, I had become rigidly attached to the outcome I imagined having the bike would offer me. I was suffering from the lack of my expectations being fulfilled. And that's the thing with attachment. It can set you up to suffer. Binding or clinging are even better ways of describing the type of attachment I'm talking about. And it's through this inability to separate or let go of the expectation you have attached yourself to that brings forth a profound sense of loss or disappointment, which the Vedas describe as the source of all suffering. Unfulfilled expectations. Well then, what is the remedy? Well, perhaps detachment would be a good way of avoiding suffering. Just simply not engage and don't get involved, and that way you won't get hurt. And while this approach on the surface may appear to have some merit, and admittedly I have definitely used this tactic, especially after a time of great pain or loss, but the problem with detachment is that it keeps you from having the experience. Instead of playing in the game of life with the possibility of losing or having an unfavorable outcome, detachment says, take your ball and go home. Don't engage. And the reality is you are always engaging in life to some degree. And with that, having expectations. Even at low levels of engagement, this is still true. So it doesn't really solve the problem. Rather, it masks the issue and can make things even worse, as you don't allow yourself the right to have the experience itself out of fear that you could become disappointed. So detachment is a lose-lose scenario, one in which you don't have the experience you want while pretending that you never really wanted it. Non-attachment is the solution we are looking for. And non-attachment means we are allowing ourselves to be fully present and engaged in the world with disregard of the outcome meeting our expectations. Now, this doesn't mean we have no expectations or that we aren't hopeful for particular outcomes, but rather, practicing non-attachment is a way of saying our feelings and emotions are not dependent on the outcome being fulfilled in the way we have imagined. Instead, when whatever happens, we simply accept it for just that. We're not bound or clinging to something that hasn't come to fruition. And therefore, we're free to have an altogether different experience, embracing what it is that it has to offer us, whether it's favorable or not. Now, with this pandemic, I would imagine most of us are currently experiencing a world that is nothing how we expected it to be. But the truth is, the world is always constantly changing. This you cannot stop. What you can do is adopt an attitude of non-attachment. And as you move forward, know that your inability to let go of how you think things will turn out is directly correlated to the degree of suffering you will experience. Now, as meditators, this choice becomes more and more obvious, and in choosing non-attachment, we lead fuller, richer lives, abundant with experience. So if your goal is to suffer less, adopting the attitude of non-attachment is the most powerful tool that you can use. I just want to say that I'm so happy that we're doing this because I'm learning so much about both of you. And Anthony, especially, I feel like every video, there's something about you or your life or your past that I have no idea about that I'm just like, oh my God. Or even like the marathon, like, I don't know. I feel like this is really great discovery of the two of you. And I'm just really happy to be on this journey and just, keep getting awed by what you guys are sharing. So
Yeah, Anthony, I really loved your thing about the books. Yeah, I loved you said was it chasing after these books, like it was like not after girls or anything, after these books.
It was crazy. I mean, it was a sort of fixation because I had a sort of list of things that I wanted, and it wasn't, part of it was kind of the hunt, just securing it. But it's also because these things were just fascinating. But it's like, when you buy a book, you read it, and then what? Do you put it on the shelf? Do you give it away? Do you leave it on a park bench with a note saying, "I enjoyed this, you might enjoy it too"? And so often we just hang on to this sort of stuff. But there was this kind of, it was like an epiphany. It's just this moment. It's like, what am I doing with all this stuff? It's obsolete. It's obsolete. It was, I enjoyed it when it was relevant, but then it became irrelevant. And I think this is the really fascinating thing, that there are, we change, and that, something that was appealing or had relevance or was sustainable in our life at one stage just gently moves into another stage. It's part of the three gunas. We talk about maintenance, creation, and destruction as being a cycle of life. And there's this cycle in terms of attachment, that you are creating the attachment, you're maintaining it. And then you think, it's just like you, Rory, with this fantastic moment when you superseded the pain and the disappointment and the anguish, and then you remembered why you were doing it, which was for the charities, and that just lifted you and off you went.
Yeah,
that's an amazing moment.
Yeah, and it felt, I guess it was one of those rare things where often you notice something in retrospect, but I kind of got this in the moment, like you were saying, an epiphany where you're like, like it's the storyline. I'd been running this storyline, like, because we always run storylines. That's how we operate, and that's why stories are such an important part of our lives, and why we go and watch movies, and why we collect lots of books, and why this format of this show is about stories. But we often don't acknowledge that we're running stories all the time. But I guess in that race, I kind of flipped that storyline from being about achievement. So one of my personality traits, if I do them at work, is that I'm the achiever, which sounds really good. And you think, oh, that sounds great. But it's actually the really shallow one that needs the good grades and that needs the acknowledgement. So I guess what was great in this race was that, and I guess the way it fits into the spiritual journey is that it was me flipping from it being about me and getting my time about going to be about other people. And that's, a key part of the spiritual journey, in any tradition, is turning from, inner directed towards helping other people. And it just completely changed everything. Rather than being my hang-ups and my this and my that, was like, oh no, it's doing it in service of someone else or other people, which, completely changed it. And then I managed to have this rewarding, memorable experience, even though it wasn't what I wanted before. And that's what we're all talking about. It's the speed at which you can change that storyline and give up the attachment which I think you were talking about, Derrick, that will reduce your suffering. But Anthony, I just wanted to make a point about your books, because it resonated with me strongly as well. Because when I moved to Australia, I left all my books and my records in London for 5 years before I came over, until I realized I was spending a fortune just keeping them in storage south of London. And I actually decided that I was going to keep my books. I threw away almost everything else, but I shipped all my books over because I loved them so much. But I did decide to give away my records. I had about 1,000 vinyl records. Wow. And I gave them away. I thought, I'm not even going to sell them, because that would take a lot of time, and I would have to kind of engage with these items again. I just gave them all to a friend. But it was like you say, there comes a point in my 20s, my records were everything. Like, I would be DJing every weekend, and they were a huge part of my life. But then I hadn't had them for 5 years. I didn't need them anymore. I'd given up that part of my life. And I was just like, look, these are a huge encumbrance. Like, everything you have in your life is a weight, and you can choose to keep them or you can choose not to. My girlfriend's a minimalist, so she's always questioning things we have in the house, and it's fine to have a big book collection, but only if you love it. And things you don't love, you just let them fall away. But yeah, Derrick, I was feeling very sorry for you. How old were you when this bike story happened?
It's funny because I was trying to remember if it was my 10th or my 11th birthday. But I remember the color of the bike was like this mint greenish blue. I think it was a Murray bicycle. It might even have had like yellow handlebars or something about it that image really was sticking out to me. Yeah, and it's funny because I hadn't thought about that story in a long time either, especially because I don't cry so much. Like when I was a kid, I used to cry a lot. It was just the way that I dealt with things. And then I got older, I didn't cry as much. So revisiting the story, I really was kind of like, oh, I forgot how I used to be that way. But also, I was a kid we didn't have a lot of money growing up. And the bike that I had before that was maybe my neighbor's bike that didn't really work that well, that he might have even just given me. So getting the bike symbolized a lot of different things for me, or at least I made it out to symbolize a lot of different things. And one of that was inclusion as well, because I didn't have a bike like the other kids. But I also felt like it was going to give me freedom. It was going to let me come and go as I pleased. And, as a kid, even as an adult, I let my mind kind of run wild with imagination about what the future is going to be like. And that's when I was talking about the story, it really hit me too. It wasn't the bike. It's not the physical thing. It's what I thought I was going to have, that feeling of getting the carpet ripped out from underneath you, And I think when you get a little bit older, you kind of either have more realistic expectations, or when they don't come out the way that you want because you've lived a life where you've experienced that over and over, it's a little easier to let go of. But as a child, I just had, all my bets were on this bicycle. And so, it helped me kind of illustrate too how strong the attachment to that idea was. But the interesting thing was, when I listened to the two of your stories, what came to mind to me was about either like time or something that's measurable. So for Rory, like, it seemed like you were attached to the time limit that you wanted to complete the task in. And Anthony, it was either how long it took you to collect these books or how many you had. And I feel like we oftentimes get attached to a number or longevity or the amount of something. And even with money, you want to have so much money. And in that quest, you lose sight of maybe the reason why you were doing it in the first place. And then when you let go of that attachment, one of the biggest things I think happens is you get into the present moment, because you're done thinking about, well, what will it mean if I have 1,000 books? Or what will it mean if I finish the race in this amount of time? And what's more important is what's going on with me right now, And is it, and what I can say for myself is, as a 10 or 11-year-old child, I couldn't figure that out. I couldn't figure out, I'm okay in this moment. But as an adult and as a meditator, we still have expectations. I still expect certain things to happen. I'm not free of them, but I'm not attached in the way where it's going to cause me pain, because happiness is in the present moment as well. And so the pain that I might be feeling is from something that has yet to happen, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious what you guys think about in terms of time or collection or something that's measurable and having attachment to a number.
Well, I guess just picking up on something you said there, what I really like about running is that it's an extreme behavior, and I'm at the extreme of my abilities and my effort, my bodily abilities, and it would be very obvious very quickly because I'd set out to do a time, and that would always be in the back of my mind. But as soon as the time was in the front of my mind, I would start tensing up. So if I look at my watch too much during the race, I would tense up because I'm thinking about, the finishing line, thinking about the goal too much, and then I wouldn't be in the moment, and it would start falling apart. So it's this really strange thing where I could viscerally tell if I was thinking about the result too much. So I would have to keep myself in the present, or, I'd be thinking about the time and then I'd realize that I was breathing way too hard, or, something had gone wrong. So it was this really interesting thing where I had this background storyline going about the time, but if I thought about it too much, it would throw me off. So I would have to come back to the present and just go, right, how am I feeling now? How am I feeling right now? Because there was this great quote that I used to love from I think it's from one of the Kenyan marathon runners. And it was about, coming back to the moment and saying, can I give more effort right now? Not thinking about, will I still be able to give more effort in 10 minutes, or there's another hour left to go to this. It's like, how are you feeling right now? And if you check in with yourself and go, well, actually right now I'm feeling all right. And that's the same, that's an extreme version in running, but you can say that in any situation. Whatever suffering or issue you're thinking about is often a projected thing in the future. And if you go, well, right now I actually feel all right, I'm not hungry, I'm not in pain, no one's like poking me with a hot poker. But right now I'm feeling okay. And that's, like you said, Derrick, it's that coming back to the present moment, because in the present moment, everything's generally okay. Like, unless you're in rare situations of physical suffering or abuse, mostly it's something that you've created in your head and you're imagining it, or like in your example, you'd created this expectation around the bicycle which then wasn't realized, which, yeah, I guess once you realize it's in your head and come back out of your head to the present moment, most stuff is okay most of the time.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's this thing of one projects the result. There's something that the result is going to give you. It's a ticket to a different state, and Derrick, with you, with the bike, it was going to be happiness, it was going to be freedom, it was going to be excitement, it was going to be the ownership of this thing. And then you're thwarted. And so suddenly the dream is shattered. It's no longer going to happen. And Rory, I can really relate to your thing about in sport, you have to take every step or moment that's all you must be concentrating on. If you look at any of the great sprinters, they are only concentrating on the step they're taking. I remember when I was a kid, I used to row a lot, quite competitively, and we got into the final up against the favourites, who were a very, very strong team. And, on paper, we were beaten. And our coach had always said to us, you never finish the race until you got to the finishing line. You haven't finished the race until you got to the finishing line, because anything can happen. The other guy can fall over, or there could be an equipment failure or whatever. And he just said, he'd always trained us and take the stroke, take your oar and row it as best you can on every stroke. And that's all we concentrated on. And then the Cox, the guy who's driving the boat, he was saying, we're catching them. We're beside them. And then we were in front of them. And we won the race. And it was just that thing of being in the moment and just applying yourself to that and not thinking about, okay, what's it going to be like wearing the medal? What's it going to be like having the status and the glory? Because, as you say, that leads to suffering. Speculation always will definitely lead to suffering. The only thing you can be sure of at any one time is right now. What's going to happen in 5 minutes' time? We haven't really got a clue. We think we know what's going to happen in 5 minutes' time. It's pretty much laid out. There's a bit of a script, but sometimes the script gets torn up or there's a page missing and suddenly we're having to ad lib. And for a lot of people, that's very scary. If they haven't got a script, if it's not all planned, they just fall to pieces. And I think this is the thing that you were talking about, Derrick, is it's going back to adaptability. It's that we get thrown off track, that what we thought was going to happen doesn't happen, or that we suddenly realize that the attachment to a particular idea or a habit or a person or an object, that's no longer going to become manifest. And then we have to just change our approach. Otherwise, we're just going to go into a downward spiral. And so we have to shake off that disappointment. And that's going back to the point you were making, Rory, that, we just have to snap out of it and move on, and move on into the next moment. And that will then guide us forward.
And yeah, I like how you can see this play out in the wider world. Like, if you ever watch sports interviews, like, I'm not a huge football fan, but if you watch a classic, Premier League football interview, they'll be like, you won the game. How did you feel about, you may win the league, you may win it. And they always say, no, Jim, I take one game at a time. It's just one game at a time. Because they know that as soon as they start speculating about winning the league, it will come the next week and they'll be like, but you said you were going to win the league. And they know that it's just kind of like tempting fate, or you're going to get into that headspace where you'll just trip and fall over next week because you'll be thinking about, how am I going to stand when I lift the trophy, rather than how am I going to play this actual game.
I agree, but I also think having a very strong image of your performance, of how you're going to run the race, and having it very clear in your mind is important. That a strong visualization of the process and the outcome can be helpful, particularly in a sporting occasion. I always remember, I think it was in the Winter Olympics, and there were some Russian skaters who were asked, why is it you never fall on the ice? And they said, because when we lie on our beds and go through the program in our heads, we don't fall on the ice. So why should we fall on the ice when we get out there onto the rink? Good point.
Yeah, I think it's
that they sort of program themselves to think like this.
It's that mix of imagining it before and visualizing it and intending a certain result, but then being able to surrender that in the moment. So during the competition, you're not you're just thinking about whatever pirouette you're about to do, not the one at the end. So it's that thinking it, but then surrendering that wish so that you can be in the moment, because you have to be in the moment, otherwise you're going to fall over. So it's that kind of different approaches for whether it's before or during, I think.
I can remember one of the first times I'd heard the idea that, the way that we are rigidly attached is the leading cause of suffering. And I was like, I don't know that I believe that. It took me a long time to get on board with that. And then the thing that I really figured out or learned or recognized, because I was like, okay, let me just try it. Let me run an experiment and see if that's true, And when I started to let go of expectations about whatever it was supposed to be, then I would definitely start to recognize, okay, yeah, I do suffer less. And I think what's important to point out is this, I think a lot of us have really great ideas of who we want to be, what kind of relationship we want to be in, our careers, and all of those things. And I can understand why a person in that quest, while they're suffering, would continue to do it. Because, we have this idea that you got to keep going and fight for it and all of these other things. But the thing that I've come to realize is what my preference really is over maintaining or trying to grasp or reach this idea that I have of myself. What I prefer more is less suffering. And that when you run the experiment and you start to allow yourself to let go of this image that you have of yourself, a number of things starts to happen. One, you don't suffer as much because the future is changing and you're not attached to it. And two, a new future or a new version of yourself is emerging at the same time. And I think as meditators, like we've mentioned before, unsustainable behaviors start falling away or are being pointed out to you that they should no longer be a part of what it is that you're doing. You know what I mean? So not that I have no image of where I want to be in 5 or 10 years, but I know I'd much rather be in a position where I experience less suffering than I ever have before, ahead of who I think I might be or should be, you know? And I remember, I think Tom was in a talk and he was speaking to somebody and she made some comment to him, something that was a little bit flippant. And his answer was, I think she was thinking that he thought he was better than everybody else. And he simply said to her, I can't answer you that, but I certainly know I suffer less than you do. And I thought that is such a powerful statement. And even if he didn't share that or express that with another person, for me to walk around in the world and recognize my suffering level is way lower than it ever has been, regardless of the car that I'm driving, how much money is in my bank account, what my title is, I prefer the less suffering, you know? I mean, and I think unless you, because I feel like some people are going to hear this and maybe think that, but go, no, it's not true. Or, because I definitely was like, don't give up. Don't give up on your dreams. You got to go for it the whole way. Yeah, you're going to suffer. It's going to suck sometimes. But then there's also that, what suffering can lead to in terms of robbing you of maybe sharing your best self with your family or your friends or all these other things. So I think it's an interesting way to maybe recalibrate expectations. If you run the experiment, try letting go of your attachments to things and see what happens, because it's delightful. It really, you know, I would like to think that I do. I suffer less. I definitely suffer much less. And looking forward and looking for new ways to even make that possible. What is the least amount of suffering I can experience? That sounds, and that's not a life I've ever imagined, I wouldn't say, before meditating at all. Wouldn't it have even occurred to me?
Yeah, I think I guess the way I see it, it's not about not having ambitions and not trying to achieve stuff. It's just knowing that ambition or that desire is just pointing you in a certain direction. You know, we talk about charm, and it's where does charm lie, and then you go towards that. But then being open to dropping that attachment when something else comes along, so that you go, right, the world is pushing me in this direction, but only so that it can then push me in this direction. And not to mean that we're super flaky and we just go, today I'm going to be a painter, and no, tomorrow I'm going to be a mandolin player, or, you know, it's not being about being flaky, but following charm. And I guess we have that difference between things that are charming and things that are for your ego, and being okay to give things up if they're just for your ego. So I guess for me with the marathon running, it was like that was an ego desire. Whereas I can still want to run lots of marathons, but maybe if I run it for a different, bigger reason. So we've got a small self reason, which is I want to beat 95% of the other people there, or a bigger reason, which is I want to run so many marathons that I inspire lots of people to take up running, or to raise money for charity. So it's, I guess for me, it's not about not having the ambitions and not working really hard, because I don't want to make it sound like that we're just going to be, you know, drop out hippie meditators, but it's more about change. Yeah, like I in my story, changing the storyline and doing it more for kind of bigger self reasons rather than smaller self reasons. And then the other point, I guess, that came to mind was the difference between, say, Vedic meditation, where we describe ourselves as householders, and it's more for people who are, yeah, I want to have a family and I want to have a career and I want to do all these things in the world. And on the other side, you have more monastic practices where it's people going, no, I am going to practice non-attachment. And I guess when I first got into meditation, I was studying more the Buddhist mindfulness practices, which are more like that practice of non-attachment. You know, that's one of the eightfold paths, or whatever it is, where you say, no, I'm not going to get happy if a good thing happens. I'm not going to get sad if something bad happens. And that's a really kind of strict approach. And I kind of now see that as, you know, that's a monk's approach, and that's fine for certain people. But for most of us, it's like, yeah, I'm going to have a bit of a roller coaster. I'm not going to have this fully flat thing. I'm going to enjoy the roller coaster, but I'm going to know quicker than I used to when to get off that roller coaster. But I'm still going to go on along the ride. But it's not about not having any suffering. It's about being able to manage it so that I can still have a full life experience, but without that kind of clinging and holding on. But it's what I like about this is it's the balance. It's the nice, you can have a bit of everything. You're just making your normal householder life more enjoyable, and with less suffering, but not no suffering.
I like the point you made, Rory, about the ego, because I think it's surrendering the ego is such an important part of this, and also the way that the intellect can come into play, and we need to just use more of our innate wisdom and intelligence, which is in bountiful supply, but so often the intellect / ego gets in the way. And if we can just rely on that more, I think there is certainly less suffering. We trip ourselves up because we have high expectations that, as what you were implying, Derrick, there's a lot of status attached to doing something or accomplishing something or having something. And, the misplaced ego is in play all the time. We all have ego, but when it becomes noticeable, it's misplaced. It's become a little too strong for the circumstances and for the environment in which it's in play. And I think there's always this tussle between the intellect and one's intelligence, one's understanding of how everything goes, because we've always been brought up to believe that what's going on up here is more important and more effective than what's going on in our heart and in our intuition. And we live in an intellectually driven society. If people were just slowing down a little bit more and connecting more with themselves, then they would realize that there's so much more wisdom available to everybody. It's all there. And this is, of course, is what we're doing with meditation, that we're accessing that infinite pool of creative intelligence, which is allied to nature's creative intelligence. All that wisdom is there for us to make use of. But there's this constant interplay. Oh, no, that would be silly. I'd look a bit foolish if I said that or did this. Again, it's the small self overruling the bigger self. And I think this is one of the most beautiful things about meditation, when we realize, the small self is really small. It's small for a reason. It doesn't. It hasn't got the durability. It hasn't got the quality. It hasn't got the strength and the stamina. Of the bigger self. The bigger self, will always win if we allow it to. And the bigger self is really where we want to be.
Well, It's interesting that you say that too, because I definitely, still, I think all of us would agree, we have small self moments. We're not always walking around as big self all the time. And what I can recognize is when I'm suffering or playing the victim or having a pity party or in some kind of turmoil, largely it's a small self experience. And if I want to have less of that or have a larger big self experience, I think the question, what is it I'm attached to? Or what is it I need to let go of? Usually is the thing, at least for me, I know I need to switch that small self suffering into a big self. This is fine. This is fine. That I didn't have the ability to do that before, where it would have gone more like, okay, I'm suffering. Why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? And then finding someone to blame. Like there's this whole, like you said before, Rory, these stories that we create and that we're living out to some extent. And I don't know that I, before meditation, had a something to let me out of that way of thinking. And now I do. You're at a red light and you're upset that it hasn't turned green yet. What do you need to let go of? You're attached to getting somewhere at a particular time. You want this thing to happen. Let go. Okay. Right. No problem. I didn't have that before, so I think it's beautiful once you start meditating and you start experimenting with all of these different things and ideas, and then you realize how robust your life actually can be, and how what was your normal was really maybe robbing you of the beauty of everything that life has to offer you. You know what I mean? So was there something today? Something happened today where I was like, you just gotta let go of that expectation. And everything's fine. You move forward and it happened, Yeah, so I'm always wanting to inspire people just to try it out. Try it out. See, experiment. I think we're always talking in this technique about doing the research. We'll ask questions about something. How does this really work? And the beautiful thing is that nobody can deny your own experience. That's something that's going to be your truth for you. And if we, the three of us, can kind of help people figure out to be better versions of themselves and try little experiments to free themselves up, even if it might sound outlandish, why not? Try it and then let us know. Let us know how it went. You tried it. I didn't think it would really work, but I did. I let go of some attachment I had and this happened, And meditation, I think, just keeps us in the space of going, keep trying that. Try that again. Try that again. You know what I mean? Where when you're fully stressed, you don't have that. You don't have that anymore. So yeah, that's really it.
and it's not like you really have to try very hard at it. The beauty of our meditation practice is that the practice is letting go of attachment time after time. Like you'll have a thought and you just let go of it, and you let go of the attachment to having no thoughts in meditation. You let go of everything. It's that kind of muscle that we exercise in meditation, which is letting go. Like we're happy to let go of each thought. When we remember to come back to the mantra, we're happy to let go of the mantra, to drop into silence. And it's that by exercising that muscle, which is, it's not like in the gym when you're pumping iron, but it's that muscle of gentleness in your head, which makes it much more easy in the real world when you're, in high stress situations. Like in my run, I can more easily do that because I've got my meditation experience and I've done it over and over again, hundreds of times a day. Like, that's what we're doing. That's one of the things that we're making ourselves better at. And it means that, we just naturally get better at this stuff. It's not what I love about this practice compared to, other disciplines I've done where it's more kind of changing the way you think. It just happens naturally. You get better at doing this stuff because the practice makes that happen. It's not like I have to think about big self, small self, and work out right now what was the playbook for this thing. It's just, oh no, I'm just naturally going to do that because that's what I've trained myself to do. Like, if I had been doing bicep curls in the gym, I'd naturally be able to pick up, like a rock off the floor more easily. It's that, what I love about it is just so natural. We're kind of talking about it now, but you will get these benefits without having to think through it all. They'll just naturally come by meditating regularly, which is what I love about this. Is it's just easy. You just do it and get the results. There's no kind of, well, hang on, let me go back to my notes and see what it said about, giving up the small self. Like, there's none of that. You just kind of, it's all included.
Yeah, I think Rory, you're so right. It's about not trying. We say, often at the end of a group meditation, don't try to meditate. And it's just letting the thing, we're in control of everything, for 23 hours and 20 minutes, we're in control of everything. But for just 20 minutes, for 40 minutes a day, we're not in control. We're not even trying to meditate. As we said before, we just set up the space, we set up the time, the environment, we close our eyes, bring the mantra to mind, and off we go. And it's easy. The minute we start applying effort and we're trying to do something, or we get attached to an outcome, or we're in a particular space, or we're experiencing a feeling that we really like and we're trying to hold on to that, then it all starts to get a bit wobbly. And the more we can let go of it and the less trying we do, the easier, and there's just more grace, and it's effortless, and then suddenly, instead of concentrating on the effort, we remove the concentration and just open ourselves to receive whatever is going to come along. And that's when the exciting things start to happen, not only with your eyes shut, but also with your eyes open.
Great.
Yeah, I agree. Now, the last little bit I'd like to add to that too is this idea, I guess, of flow. Is that I think everything is changing, just like the water in a river is changing, to the extent that you never step into the same river twice. After it's rained heavily, there's more water in the river than there was before, and the current might be a little faster. And there's never really a point at which the river tries to hold on to its position. It just is. It keeps flowing and keeps changing. And as human beings, we have, this consciousness or this idea of, oh, I really like this. How do I keep this? And we may have some success of that to a certain degree. And the more we try to do that, the harder it becomes to hold on, because there is only flow the whole time. So it's about really how well have you positioned yourself to let the flow keep flowing and flowing like a river. We've heard that, hundreds of times, but it seems to make even more, seems to be more powerful to me now that we're talking about it even more. I'm like, okay, yeah, I get, like, let it has to flow. There has to be flow in it, one after the other. When you're trying to create or control or stop or focus or whatever, that's gonna set you up, or even like in Taoism. I remember when I first heard about it, and I read, I don't know if you guys have read the Tao of Pooh, but it's Taoism told through the characters of Winnie the Pooh. And there's this idea of getting in the river and letting the current take you wherever it goes. And I kept thinking as a kid, or when I was reading it, I was like, yeah, but what if I want to go against the current? What if what I want is on the other side of the bank? Maybe flow is not the thing I want to do. And now flow is absolutely the thing that I want to do. It's more delightful than swimming upstream or across. So I just wanted to add that little button.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because if you prevent flow, if you think of taking the river analogy and you build a dam, then you're building an enormous amount of pressure, and there has to be a counterforce to prevent the flow from occurring, and that's going to require a lot of effort. And if there's a breach, usually there are catastrophic results. And I always love it, talking about swimming to the other bank. There's always that delightful story that's told often when we go to Rishikesh in North India, which you guys know, but up in the higher parts of the river, you can often, if you stand on the bank, you can hear this kind of you can hear chattering and noise coming from the middle of the river. And there are often these kind of big boulders there. And if you look very carefully, you can see these little water sprites. They're very small, and the current there is huge, and they're kind of clinging onto each other, and then they're reaching out to grab the rocks and boulders so that they can somehow sort of not get swept downstream. And as you know, behind a boulder, there's always that kind of lull. There's a little bit of smooth water as the water's rushing past. And they're all trying to get around into this area. And there's a little bit of shouting, and you kind of watch these little chaps, and they're really having a hard time. And then you hear somebody's laughing. What is that? There's a little water sprite on his back, and he's looking up at the blue sky, and he's just floating down the river, and he's just laughing at everybody. He's just having a delightful time. He's just going with the flow.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay, thank you for watching to the end. Each episode we offer a takeaway, a practical exercise you can do at home to apply this knowledge to your own life. In this episode we were talking about attachment, and we touched on how it can be beneficial to let go of things from the past in order to leave room for new things in the future. And this week it's time for a clear out. Your task is to get rid of at least one thing from your home that in some sense is either weighing you down or holding you back. Now you can sell it, you can recycle it, you can bin it, or you can give it away, but the idea is to remove something from your life. And you get extra marks if it's something that has meant a great deal to you in the past, but no longer has the same relevance for you. If you're happy to share your stories, we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to have you join the conversation. Please send them through to us at stories@thevedicconversation.com or post them on social media with the hashtag #TheVedicConversation. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your followers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you next time.